Welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Will Chernoff. This episode is sponsored by 12th Street Sound, a recording studio in New Westminster, and my favorite place to record and mix my music. Anthony Senarini at 12th Street Sound does album, EP, and single recording, mixing for your music, filming of live session videos in studio, and full production services. I found his studio to be of excellent value, and his recordings stand up to the best of the best. And when I record with Anthony, I get the space to craft my story as an artist. He has great gear and great ears, and he's recorded some of my most streamed tracks of all time. My very most streamed track called Little Milk Discovery by William Chernoff. You can check out 12th Street Sound today at 12thstreet.ca/booking to tell Anthony about your next project for 2022. And when you book now, tell him that the RCP sent you. That's 12thst.ca/booking to get going on your next music project today. And tell Anthony that the RCP sent you. This month, March 2022, I launched something new and different at Rhythm Changes. It's called The Update, where I'm writing 3 times per week, delivering it to you by email, and also making it available on the web or in your feed reader for subscribers only. The updates consist of fun and insightful stories on creative music in Canada, and especially the Vancouver scene, that I experience on a daily basis. I've really been enjoying sharing them with the first group of subscribers here in the launch month, and so as we close out March 2022, I'm inviting you to subscribe now as well. You can do that at rhythmchanges.ca/update, where you'll get access to a discount and a special price for being an early subscriber. And if you want to learn more, I'm also including a page in the description of this episode where you can read more about what I'm doing there and find links to my FAQ page. But to get access to a special price, subscribe now at rhythmchanges.ca/update to get the Rhythm Changes update today.
I like the idea of a connoisseur. What is a connoisseur? And how do you become a connoisseur of wristwatches or whatever it is that you know about? And so I thought about the idea of being a connoisseur of love. Like, what does that mean to people? Why do people buy like $80 socks? The marketing had to be something about like, you're not a rich jerk, you're a sock connoisseur.
Happy Wednesday from New Westminster, BC, and this is the Rhythm Changes podcast, the only weekly interview podcast about creative music in Canada. As an active performer, my favorite moments from the working world of music have been the stories that we tell before, during, and after shows, and the Rhythm Changes podcast tells stories like these. Keep in touch with the BC music community in 30 minutes each week. This week, I bring you one of my favorite musicians on Vancouver Island. That's up next. Our guest today is a singer who released her second vocal jazz album, Love for Connoisseurs, on March 25th, 2022. Here in BC, where she has lived for 25 years now, she performed in support of the album at Frankie's in Vancouver, Herman's in Victoria, and Char's Landing in Port Alberni before embarking on a cross-Canada tour. Her band for those BC dates was Miles Black on piano, Ken Lister on bass, and Buff Allen on drums. And on her album, you'll hear Miles, as well as Jody Prosnick on bass, Joel Fountain on drums, and Dave Say on saxophone. You can find her online at angelasjazz.com, find her on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under her own name, and stream her album anywhere. So please welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast, Angela Verbrugge.
Thanks for having me on, Will.
My pleasure. Now, I want to start off with Dave Frischberg because his name keeps coming up on the podcast. When I talk to Darlene Cooper and Bill Sample for their Wild Blue Herons album release, Darlene mentioned Frischberg. And when I talked to Carmen J. Price, he mentioned him as well. And I know that at least one reviewer has compared your kind of wittier songs to Dave Frischberg. So is he a big influence on you?
He is. I mean, I really wish I could have met him before he passed away.
Yeah.
I have the book about his life. I guess that he wrote that one. And somebody else edited it, I believe. And it was interesting to read his story. I mean, he is an influence and he isn't, in the sense that I think my opinions and values were formed earlier than when I first heard him.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's inspiring to know what kind of career he had as a lyricist and the way that he was able to put together lyrics in a humorous way. I found as a vocalist, before I knew about him, that there weren't that many standards in our Great American Songbook or whatnot that were really very funny. Like, I mean, you have the potato kind of songs and, but then you're flipping through 4 real books and trying to find something that is more lighthearted and funny. And there's a few for sure, but I like to entertain, and some songs that have that character to them that have, a lot of our Great American Songbook did come from old musicals. And that is one of the first ways that I experienced them. Growing up in Amherstview, Ontario, with parents that were not in jazz, being part of a high school music program that was very strong but didn't have a lot of jazz happening. We were reading big band charts. I played trombone and we sang choral arrangements, but it wasn't jazz. And so my first exposure to a lot of these songs was at the video store when other kids were renting Friday the 13th or whatever, like horror movies. I was like, oh, Singing in the Rain. Let's bring that home.
Oh, man. Nice. Yeah, I mean, I would say your most kind of witty Verbrugge songs on this new album would probably be Enough's Enough, which was one of the notable singles where you talk about house cleaning and chores, and 20th Century Fox, where you have that pun on the good man being that title character of the 20th Century Fox.
Sometimes, I don't totally decide these things. Like when I listen to the compositions by the partner composers that I'm working with, I hear a catchphrase. Somewhere in the melody, I hear 20th Century Fox, or I heard with my first album, I heard I'm running late. And then the rest of it kind of comes out of that. And for Enough's Enough, I thought, well, what could enough be enough of? And for me, that's definitely cleaning. So
okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And that was one of my top picks too. I also really loved Maybe Now's the Time. That was one of my favorite tracks. It kind of has that centerpiece vibe, and Miles Black composed the music for that tune. It's like a blues that goes up half steps from B flat all the way up to E flat, right?
Right. And maybe it is Now's the Time, because that's how I first wrote it. Is I wrote it, lyrics for Charlie Parker's Now's the Time. Actually, Sheila Jordan helped me smooth a few places over, and I started performing them like at jams in different places a few years ago. But in terms of getting the Parker estate to bless them, I don't know if that was going to be possible. So Miles composed an alternate melody inspired by Now's the Time.
There you go. So you have 2 Vancouver-based composers of the music to which you wrote all the lyrics throughout the whole album. Miles Black, who wrote that tune, and Saul Burson, who wrote Not Here, Not Now, which is like a tango with a soprano sax playing by Dave Say. You could have collaborated with them locally, you being based in Victoria and also frequently coming to Vancouver, or online back and forth. And the other composers, other than yourself, are New York-based musicians. How does this sort of process happen where you end up connecting with these people and finishing these compositions that they started the music for?
This did happen over time. After the first album, I loved standards, and I started to put together. I went to Vermont Jazz Center and I met the producer of the first album, Cameron Brown, who's a very experienced bassist, has played on a lot of famous recordings and worked with Sheila Jordan a lot. And he had invited me to come to New York and make a record. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so out of my league. I've got to figure out what I can do on that record. And so that's when I started trying to write some lyrics and some original material. It continued when I was going to Frankie's. When I lived in Vancouver up until 2019, I was frequently at Frankie's, at least, for the second set, if I could get the kids to bed and get down there. And so I met a lot of New York instrumentalists that were coming through town and heard their music. So in the case of Cold and Hot Blues, I heard Ken Fauser perform that at Frankie's. And I loved it. And I went home and stayed up all night and wrote those lyrics. And then he had 2 nights at Frankie's. So I brought them back the next night. I texted them to him and kind of talked to him right then and there about the idea of bringing his composition into the vocal jazz repertoire. His song originally had been called Blues for Mabes. He had a little bit of hesitation that it was not going to be about Mabes in the vocal version, that it's this love story set in winter, where the feeling that you're going to see someone that you're excited very excited and romantically interested in. And you don't bother zipping up your coat. You don't bother putting your scarf or your hat on, and it's cold, but you're kind of half running and you're feeling a bit reckless with the ice and jumping over that puddle and whatever, because you're just like wanting to get there and meet up with them. I felt like that was the story. So then I was like, uh-oh, does it need to be about Mabes? And so then actually I talked to Harold Mabern when he was recording his last project in Canada. Well, he had one more that was released on Smoke, but on the Smoke Sessions label. But yeah, Michael Glynn was actually staying with me. I had an extra room, and so I would often put up musicians that were visiting Vancouver. And so we went down to Frankie's to hear that recording that night. And I asked Mr. Mabern, would it be okay if the song that Ken Fauser wrote for you in tribute to you wasn't about you? Is that okay? And he's like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. So I was like, so then I told Ken, okay, I think we're good to go here. And he's not going to be offended that it wasn't about him. But yeah, each of them kind of have a different story as to how they came about. I worked on Ray Gallen's Cellar recording kind of as his production assistant from the get-go. After I made my record with him, I was like, come on, you got to make a record as a leader, and sort of helped him with all the administrative and marketing organization to pull that together and make that happen. So I was very familiar with all his repertoire and listening to different takes and the different mixes and mastering and all of that. And so I knew his material really well. So my Enough's Enough, the one about cleaning, is called +1 instrumentally.
Okay.
And Nick Hempton, the 20th Century Fox one, it's called 10th Street Turnaround. And probably also, I think I heard him play that at Frankie's or maybe at Smalls when I was in New York. And he kindly added a verse for me for that one. And Ray's Harm's Way is because it was written originally as a etude for his students to explore the harmonic minor scale. And he recorded it with Kenny Washington, David Wong, and it's been very popular on the streaming platforms. It's a really fast, up-tempo, fun one. And he added a verse for me as well to set that story up before I tell the stories of a bad boyfriend through the song Jive Turkey.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, there's just like a lot of different ways that these things come about.
Yeah, cool. And then you've got Neil Miner, because this album came out on the Gutstring Records label, which is Neil Miner's label name. So he also contributed 2 tunes compositionally to the album. This is Manhattan and Mr. Right. So what's your collaboration with Neil been like?
Right. So Neil offered to put out my first album after hearing it through his connection with Ray. He's active bassist on the scene in New York. He had toured with Jane Monheit, and he wrote the Mr. Right song that he calls Blues Okura when he was in Japan on tour with her. And he used to be doing quite a few gigs in New York with Annie Ross of Lambert Hendricks and Ross. And so I was like, Neil, can you bring I'm Running Late and see what Annie thinks of it? I'd love to know. But it never happened before she passed away, unfortunately. But yeah, Neil became a friend and an ally through me releasing the first album on Gutstring. And I listened to a lot of his music, and some of his compositions just caught my ear. And so I asked him if it was cool if I tried to write lyrics for them. And, there's always this kind of dance at first. How much effort and time do I put into it before I show it to the composer? Because I want them to see the potential, but I don't want to invest like weeks of time and then they don't like the concept or the idea at all, and then have to discard it. So, usually I write like maybe have a draft, have a strong draft, but it's not a final version by any means, and run it by them. And they usually have some suggestions or ideas too to contribute, which is helpful. So yeah, Neil's This Is Manhattan is his Manhattan Spring. So again, it's kind of fun, I think, to listen to them back to back and see what elements of, how we adapted it with our quartet. He recorded that one with Peter Bernstein and Chris Byers, and it's a great record. It's a Sweet Tooth record. And so those were the ones that most caught my ear on that record and that I attempted And then when I was applying for funding from the government, they, of course, they love to see original Canadian content and innovation. And so I thought that I would focus on finishing maybe the drafts that I had started on some of those songs. And of course, this was just when you don't have a jazz diva, jazz great to emulate on like you do with standards, you have inspiration. People have taken it different ways. You can find many recordings of every song pretty much to be inspired by, or to, on the opposite hand, to think, how can I do it differently than all of them? Yeah. In these cases, with new repertoire, to come up with the arrangements and learn to sing it. Some of them are very tricky melodies with, just for different reasons, they're tricky tunes to sing, as well as, just to decide about the arrangements and how to feature different members of the band or extrapolate on what the composer intended, while you still want to have the integrity of the song so that people can hear the melody for the first time vocally.
Yeah. And then you wrote 3 songs yourself, music and lyrics: the title track, Love for Connoisseurs, Je ne veux pas te dire bonsoir, and Corn on the Cob. So when did you write those songs in the context of the journey to get to this album out?
The French song is the translation of the title track from my first album, The Night We Couldn't Say Goodnight. So I thought it would be fun to bring it into French. And so at one point, I just sat down like I did study in high school. I took a couple of, in Ontario, we have OACs, grade 13 in my day. And so I had studied French, but I had Google Translate in my dictionary, and I had a friend from France help me smooth it over and work on the pronunciation quite a lot. So,
gotcha.
So that happened with that one. And actually, when I was in London singing in October, there's a Brazilian guitarist, vocalist, who has now written Portuguese lyrics for it.
Okay.
And they sound so beautiful. I'm so excited to figure out how to record that with him. And then, the Corn on the Cob, I decided I would like to try to write a contrafact for Surrey with a Fringe on Top. And so I built into the C section, I built in the kind of tag and added a verse. And so most people don't seem to recognize it. So it kind of has the country flavor still. I was inspired by like the Oklahoma that Surrey is from, and a romance over at a summer picnic where the gentleman in question brings her, sees her hungrily waiting and brings her like a really, growing up in Ontario near Kingston, my dad, his parents, my grandparents and family, they would grow corn. And it's kind of, I think like out here, if salmon is been frozen, people are like, oh, it's already been frozen. No, thanks. Like I want fresh, fresh salmon. Yeah. And in Ontario, like if corn is too old or if it's, hasn't been picked soon enough, it's just like, no, that's for cows.
Oh, yeah.
So that this gentleman caller in this case brought like the most sweet, delicious, fresh, hot cob of corn to her at the picnic. And then they have this quirky romance where, she notices that he's got so much sunscreen caked on. He's not a classic Romeo. And then what was, the third one?
And then the title track.
Love for Connoisseurs. That one, I actually wrote the melody first and then had this song that originally I had some other kind of almost more contemporary chords with it. And when I was just working with the melody to think about the lyrics, I realized that I wanted it to be more of like a Beyond the Sea, like a classic 50s big band song. I felt like kind of somehow inspired by the water. Like I felt like it was a song about sailing or ocean, just the way that the melody, I don't know how to explain it, but that's just the imagery that kept coming to mind. And so I used, for the lyrics, I wanted to talk about love. And a lot of our vocal jazz repertoire is about new love or love gone wrong, but use this to talk about enduring love. And from the electric impulse across the room, the initial attraction, and how love can struggle, the well runs dry, and then the water or the love comes flooding back in and replenishes the relationship, and it gets stronger. And I guess the Connoisseurs came from at one point I had read this article in some magazine at a doctor's office or something where they were talking about why do people buy like $80 socks?
Okay.
So they were saying, well, like the marketing had to be something about like, you're not a rich jerk, you're a sock connoisseur. And I thought that was so funny, right? Like just.
Oh man.
So I thought I like the idea of a connoisseur. What is a connoisseur? And how do you become a connoisseur of socks or wristwatches or whatever it is that you think that you know about? And so I thought about the idea of being a connoisseur of love. Like what does that mean to people?
Oh,
yeah.
Love it. A mixture of the funny and the profound, right?
Right.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions just about all the great work you're doing as an independent artist here to get this album out into the world. And there's two different parts to that I have observed. And one of them is that you run the Jazz in Victoria Facebook group. What's that been like as a puzzle piece in promoting probably both your albums, but especially this one?
Well, when I moved to Victoria, I noticed like I kind of missed the Jazz in Vancouver Facebook page as a way of communicating with other jazz-specific musicians and vocalists and community members, photographers, or whoever, fans. That it was so I just started it and started inviting anybody that I knew to join. And I try to change the cover page regularly, the cover image to feature if I've been out at a show and I've taken a picture, or if people crop and provide it to me, I'm happy to put it up, or to remember a member of the community who's passed away. So I think it's nice. It's nice to even refer back to as like a bit of a history of our jazz community, what's happening and who's active. And we've lost a couple people this year. We lost a saxophonist, Sean Winter, to a drug overdose. And we lost a vocalist friend that I met originally at swing camp to pneumonia. So, and they're both younger than, you would expect to suddenly lose a friend. So yeah, I think it's a nice way for people to share community big band videos, or I like doing it. It's not a lot of work, and it does give me an opportunity to share my own links and things that I'm working on. The only thing that I think is, I wish that we had a little bit more engagement. I think at some point I'd almost like to do a workshop with someone who understands Facebook and Instagram and social media algorithms for our community, because what I'm learning when I have taken some of these workshops is that if you not only just like a post, but if you actually take the time to comment, then the algorithm shows it to more people. Like why do you see somebody's birthday or it's their anniversary? It's easy for people because they can type happy birthday or happy anniversary or congratulations on your engagement or whatever. And then Facebook starts recycling that up to the top, floats it up to the top of people's feed over and over again. Whereas sometimes if as musicians we share a link to stream our new song that takes us away from Facebook, that's just going to sink like a rock. Or if we share a pre-save link, again, that's going to take you off Facebook. So just finding ways as a community to support each other, to share information about our gigs, about our releases, about our educational pursuits or offerings, if people are offering lessons. Yeah, I just think that if the community is strong, we're all better off. So just finding ways. I try to take a moment and just quickly comment on as many posts as I can. And I don't want to be on social media all the time either. But if we all kind of, and we don't always know the right thing to say, and some of us are shy and all of that, but it does make a difference. Just to take Karen Plato's amazing in Vancouver. She's always, posting other people's gigs or announcements and sharing kind words about things that she's witnessed in the community. I think to look to role models like her for how we can all lift each other up.
I love that. Karen has shared this show, the Rhythm Changes podcast, multiple times when she found it. So thanks, Karen, for that. Much appreciated.
Yeah, you'll have to have her on soon.
Yeah. I want to close out here by asking you one more thing about the album, because when I was looking through the credits, of course, you recorded it with Dave Sekula at Monarch in Vancouver in March 2021. But you have a credit in the album for Katie George as an associate producer and as somebody who contributed to the arrangement. So I would love to know, what was Katie's contribution and role in this whole production?
So I have studied jazz singing and jazz theory, not in a traditional college. I went to school for acting. So then I was playing catch up when I decided to start doing vocal jazz. So I've studied with, all the leading vocalists on the scene in Vancouver, like Jennifer Scott and Kate Hammett-Vaughan and Karen Plato. And I've also studied, internationally with Sheila Jordan and taken lesson with Karen Allison and different coaches for technique as well as jazz. I just tried to cobble together my own education. I actually used to take lessons with Natasha D'Agostino as well before she was so tragically taken from us. And so I'm not immune to working with someone who's, she's like, I don't know, she's only in her early 20s, but Katie has worked incredibly hard to become an incredible expert in vocal jazz improvisation and theory. And she's an amazing transcriber. She can just transcribe, anything. And she's got great ears and great sensibilities. I love her taste. And so I sought her out as a teacher, as a coach, and we work over Zoom. And then when the album started coming together, I don't think we officially decided that she was going to be like the associate producer, but what ended up happening was, again, these are all new songs, new compositions, and or at least new to the vocal jazz repertoire. So I worked with Miles Black, but I also worked with Katie to come up with, as like a sounding board to help decide the arc of the album, the order, she tuned into, I was re-recording a few of the vocals and she came on Zoom into the studio with us, but just for rehearsing, her pointing out what she heard. I think it's a bit of a lonely thing when you're a creative, right? I'm definitely a loner. I'm happy doing that. But at the same time, especially when you don't have an audience to try it out for, and it is hard to listen to yourself back and not get discouraged sometimes. So it's nice to have someone that will listen and point out the positives as well as be honest about what could be improved. So yeah, Katie was amazing. And then she ended up writing the liner notes for the project, and she's just such a, sunshine. Like she shines her enthusiasm for improvisation and her enthusiasm for her can-do attitude. There's no, she's so positive and so helpful and supportive. So I was very, very, very lucky. I felt very lucky to get her time given the pandemic, given that she's doing her master's degree at McGill and teaching, and she does social media and release consults as well. And I know that at some point when she finishes McGill, she's going to be on the road and in high demand as a headliner she already is, at jazz festivals. So I was glad to get access to her advice and time to help shape this project, and to have her and Miles and people like Ray Gallen and other of the composers weighing in. I'm not very good at asking for help. I'm kind of a loner. I try to figure things out on my own, but then it's very humbling because you need to assemble a team when you're making a record if you want it to be the best it can be. And so yeah, Dave Sekula also at the helm at Monarch is such a treasure. It's a great studio, has a great welcoming vibe, and Dave just knows exactly what he's doing so that everyone, there's no problems at all. Like, having had a few problems the first album, other horror stories from vocalists, to trust your project with someone like Dave. Yeah, it just means he takes care of business and everything's exactly as it should be, so that you have the best files to work with, the best choices of takes. And yeah, it was a great experience.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful. That's the kind of collaboration I like to see, this role that Katie's having, and obviously what Dave's done for you and many of the other guests on this show. But I mean, I could say that positive attitude and that getting down to business and knowing how to do everything, I would say both those things right back at you, Angela, because I see you, I see how great of a job you're doing, and congrats on such a great album release. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Rhythm Changes podcast. If you like what we do here, I invite you to sign up for the free weekly article at rhythmchanges.ca. This week's article, available now, is about what makes a jazz album heavy, so you can check that out, and if you enjoy it, definitely sign up for more stories that make an impact on the creative music scene in Canada, delivered to you every week. You can sign up for the free weekly article on our homepage, rhythmchanges.ca.